Nick Preddice, partner with the Affinity Group, LLC. Welcome to the Council of Industry podcast.
Harold, great to be with you this morning.
So tell us, Affinity Group, what is it you guys do and who are your clients?
Well, I'll tell you what we do, and then I'll kind of tell you how we evolved to doing it. A financial planning, wealth management, financial consulting firm. Typically, when people think of wealth management, they think of investment management, and that is a component of what we do. But about 85% of our clients are business owners. And as you well know, most business owners have their equity in the business. And so
Right.
issues around estate planning and succession planning and a whole variety of other things is really, where we focus.
And how long have you been doing it?
I hate to date myself. I'm 55. I got into the business when I was 21. I attempted insurance sales. In 6 months, I made $105, determined that probably wasn't going to be a successful trajectory for me. I learned the investment side of the business. People like to talk about investments. I found that to be a little bit easier. But as we started working with more sophisticated and wealthy people, I came to the realization that their investments really weren't the problem. It was all of the other moving pieces involved in their life that they needed to think through, how best to handle.
Yeah, so those moving pieces, I guess we can kind of just jump right into that. I've been doing this for, with our association for more than 30 years, and I've seen some generational change, right? It's actually one of the joys of my job is to work with the children of people who hired me and, that kind of stuff. So it's great, but it's not easy. I can point to stories that are great successes where the handoff was simple and complete, and the owners or the founders or the whatever generation got a lot of equity out and passed it along, and everybody's happy. And then there are definitely stories of friction and jealousy, and yeah, I'm sure you deal with that more often than not.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately the latter is more often the outcome, or the issue, at least in where we find people, because figuring out money is pretty easy. Figuring out tools and resources is pretty easy. Figuring out people and their egos and their insecurities and jealousy, all the things that make us human are not so easy. And so oftentimes, particularly with business owners, it's easy to sort of ignore the truth around those things because I can just put my head down. There's always issues, there's always opportunities,
Right.
and there's always tomorrow, right? Until
Right.
there isn't a tomorrow.
Right. Eventually, tomorrow comes,
Yeah.
and you really do want to get out or pass it along. I guess you've got stories. I mean, I can only imagine, some success stories, some horror stories. But I mean, is it typically like sibling rivalry or jealousies, or is it? I mean, how does that manifest itself when there's a transition?
I think it's that. I think it's a lot of things. So I'll use an example. Second generation business owner took over for his father. Very different visions for the business. Son, who is now a few years older than I am, turned the business into something that was successful into something that's wildly successful, and has built a big lifestyle around that. I mean, he
Hmm.
claims he's fairly humble, but $6 million house and a $4 million vacation house and a couple of
That's a
horses.
successful business. Yeah.
Maybe not quite so humble. But part of what made him successful is he has an incredible drive and work ethic. And so he wasn't home a lot.
Gotcha.
And he has a daughter that has followed him into the business. She certainly has some capacity. She doesn't have her dad's capacity. He has a very strong personality and tends to dominate conversations and decisions and is not very good at coaching. He's more good
Hmm.
at dictating. And so the father daughter relationship is always dad growls and daughter kind of pulls away.
Hmm.
He has a son who has some challenges and is just not cut out for the business. And he has a wife who's a wonderful wife, wonderful homemaker, but doesn't have any interest in the business whatsoever. And so we met about 13 years ago. And I took one look at his balance sheet and I said, well, what's your exit strategy? He didn't have one.
Hmm.
And I said, if you don't have an exit strategy and we can't create one, we have, but if we can't create one, we need to start taking some of the money that you're reinvesting in the business and doing something else with it, not necessarily because you're going to make more money, but so that we can build some diversification so that if in 15 years you don't have an exit strategy, you've got enough money to be
Right.
okay, right?
Right. Yeah,
And
it's the lifestyle to which he is accustomed, right? Yeah.
exactly. And so
Without that
we've gone,
cash.
and this is kind of an extreme example, so I
Mhm.
sort of hesitate to throw the number out, but it's a real number. We've gone from less than $1 million of liquidity outside of the business to $19 million of liquidity
Hmm.
outside of the business. And it's not because the stock market made him wealthy. It's because we said, all right, we're going to come up with a number, and we're going to, in essence, place a personal tax on your profits, so that a portion of your profits can go somewhere other than the business. And we were very intentional around building a relatively conservative investment portfolio, because he's wealthy and we're really trying to conserve the wealth, not knock the cover off the ball and take unnecessary chances. But it was a real mindset shift for him, because
Sure.
it was a loss of control in his mind.
And you're also setting up the next generation more for success then, if they don't have to be generating a certain amount of revenue to pay whatever that debt might be, or whatever the previous owner or the father needed, that family needed to stay in custody. That's fascinating. So, I mean, what's the process that you go through? I mean, obviously it's, I mean, I've known you for a while. You have an approachability. You are certainly someone who can ask a direct question. I mean, is that, but you can't go in swinging, like, right?
No. You've got to, you've got to take the time to build a relationship. It takes time for people to trust. Like everyone's dealt with someone in the quote unquote financial services profession. And in most cases, they're trying to sell them insurance or investments. And so they think that's the end game. We're fee based, so that's not the end game. But it takes a while for somebody to understand that. And so, to answer your question, Harold, I'll spend as much time as it takes with someone to build a relationship to the point that they're comfortable having an honest conversation. And when we get to that point, I ask a lot of, kind of big picture questions. What's important to you? Why is it important to you? What are you trying to create legacy wise around your business? What are you trying to create legacy wise within your family, right? Are there multi-generational values that you want to transfer? And once we kind of have the big picture and the why behind the big picture, and the why is probably the hardest part for most business owners, because they'll say it's for their family. In most cases, that's not true. It's for them.
Really?
Right? It's their ego. It's the game they play, and they play it well. And it's the game they want to continue to play. So once we have the big picture and the why, well, now we've got to wrap our arms around all the moving pieces. Right? What are all the business entities? Is there real estate involved? What's the interrelationship between the business entities? How does money flow? How is debt structured? What are you obligated for from a personal guarantee standpoint? What do cash flows look like? There's a big difference between what a tax return says and what someone's actually doing with their money. What have you done from an estate planning standpoint? Do you understand it? Has it been updated? Has it been implemented? Is there a succession plan? Like a well thought out succession plan? And if there isn't, is there a disaster plan? Right? If you don't wake up today, who's in charge? What's the game plan? Have you developed those things? And in most cases, the answer to at least that piece is no. And then it's building out a roadmap from where they are to where they want to be, and helping to quarterback all the other professionals that need to be involved, right? Their accountant has to be involved. Their attorneys have to be involved. Their bankers have to be involved, depending on the size of the business. Some of their key management team might have to be involved.
Right. And I think that's really an interesting point, because I think a lot of others think that transition planning and succession planning really is, just like kind of a financial instrument, right? It's what insurance do you have in place? It's really not that well thought out, just roadmap. I mean, the why. I mean, I think that's so important to get to, and really, the rest of it flows. I guess all those tools are fairly easy. Some more complex than others, but they're there, they exist. There are smart people around us, and you certainly work with a lot of them who can put that in place. But it's just matching those strategies and those tools to what people really want to have happen. And you're right. The emotion associated with all of this is really significant.
Yeah, I have a client who just a couple years ago made the biggest bet at the age of 62 he's ever made in his business career. And we've had a long working relationship. We're very good friends. We're very direct with one another. And he's like, well, this is going to ultimately be my family's legacy. I said, this is ultimately your legacy. That has nothing to do with your family. In fact, this put your family at risk. This put your family in peril. Right? This is not what you should be doing at 62. But he did it anyway. And he wants to go out on top. And I understand that. But there's consequences to making decisions based on ego.
Right. So I guess going to go back a little bit to that process, so you talk to the owner and get their why, but then you obviously have to figure out, they may say, oh, I'm going to want it for my kids. And those kids may be, all over the place. I mean, with a family business earlier this week, and it was actually really interesting because those kids went off in different directions, but found their way back. And, they're a nice, everyone seems to be on the same page in that world. But I mean, how do you get people on the same page, and how do you have those difficult conversations?
Well, you've got to see if people are open. We're working with a family now, sixth generation going on to the seventh generation.
Wow.
Son and daughter, or the seventh generation, both have grown up in the business. Both actually went to college to study the very field or industry, I should say, the business is in. So they're certainly very well equipped, except the sister, the daughter, is very risk adverse and doesn't want to take the risks and the personal guarantees that the son needs to take in his estimation to grow the business. And so the parents were kind of frozen because, from an estate planning standpoint, we should get more of the business assets over to our kids. From a vote of confidence standpoint, we should get more of the business assets over to our kids. From a personal guarantee standpoint, we'd like them to start making the personal guarantees and take the onus off of us. But she doesn't want what he does. He's willing to take the risk. And so how do we deal with it? Because if he's willing to take risks, she's not willing to take, that's not fair. And we actually came into the family situation through the son. And so we understood his perspective. I said, why don't you write a letter to your parents? Sometimes it's easier to express things in writing and take the emotion out, right? They might get emotional when they read this, but it's not them getting emotional together. And so he wrote the letter and ran it by us, not that he needed my help writing it. And, his parents basically came back to him and said, look, we understand your perspective. We don't know what to do. And he said, would you meet with Nick and his team? And so you go back to where we were 10 minutes ago, like, how do you get people to open up? Well, I know walking in there's a wariness. Like, what's your end game? My end game is to see if I can help you guys. So we got to a point pretty quickly in our second discussion where they, were very open with their feelings and their concerns. And it wasn't just feeling the concerns around the business. It was, son-in-law and damaging relationships and all of that. And then I went and had a discussion with the daughter, the sister, and I didn't know her. And I said, I understand you probably have a wariness. There's no reason to trust me. I work with your brother. I talk to your parents. So the more honest that you're willing to be, the better this discussion is going to be. And she was great. I mean, she was completely candid. And she, okay, I'm fine with him having more shares. I'm fine with him having the voting shares. I'm fine with changing the operating agreement, because there was a clause in the operating agreement that said all shareholders regarding of voting shares have to be unanimous in a series of decisions. And most of those decisions were financial. So even if he has all the voting and she has none of the voting based on the operating agreement, she has the right to say, no, we're not going to take that
full veto. Yeah. Interesting.
Exactly. And so we've spent a lot of time with the various family members. We spent a lot of time sort of building out what is the optimal gifting or transfer strategy for the parents. We've spent a lot of time thinking about, well, if you give up shares, how are you going to continue to have income? What's the best way to do that from an income tax standpoint? We've been working very closely with their accountants on this, and ultimately we're going to have to take it back to the attorney. But they felt like they were trapped and without good options. And the reality was we just need to have enough honest discussion to see what everyone's comfort and kind of end game is, and then arrange the chess pieces in the right manner.
Do you ever come across irreconcilable differences? Where somebody where there's just going to be we're just never going to speak to each other again, or something like that. Is it that ugly?
I don't know that I've seen that all that often. I've seen situations that just can't work. So we have a founder who created his business 25 years ago, grew up quite successfully, kind of did it in an old school manner. Like, he certainly could have had better systems and controls in place, but through sheer force of his personality and his determination, built a 400 employee business. And then they transferred it to their children. There's a different capability amongst the three children. And ultimately, the oldest was kind of living with the burden of, taking care of his parents, running the business, his brother, like the whole thing. And they've ultimately decided that they're most likely going to sell the business because it's probably the best end result for everybody involved.
Hmm.
Which, fortunate from a financial standpoint, unfortunate from a legacy standpoint. But sometimes, to your point of irreconcilable differences, sometimes the situation is the boss.
So, do you have any, special training to do this? Is this just something that you kind of developed through the years, or is this because it feels, talking to you and knowing this world, it feels a bit of a gift, to be perfectly honest with you, that people will listen and trust your judgment and allow you into this, what is really an intimate and sometimes probably not pretty world that they all live in.
So, no, I don't think I've had any special training in it. I think I've gone through a lot of executive coaching. I've always believed in coaching. So if I felt in my professional career, personal career, there's a gap, I'll go seek help in learning how to close that gap and learning that skill set. My background's actually psychology, Harold, which
Is
when I
it
get in the
okay?
field, I didn't think it would be relevant. I think it's more relevant than a financial background because of all the issues we're talking about, right? Money's pretty easy to direct, people less so. So,
Okay.
and then we have a ton of smart people in our firm that can help figure out complex financial things. But if you don't have that relationship, if someone isn't being honest, if someone isn't being vulnerable, right, in terms of conversations and what the real issues are, then all the different financial designs in the world may not solve the problem.
That's true. So, shifting gears just a little bit, you are someone who's very engaged in the community. I've known you from Access Supports for Living, Hudson Valley Economic Development Corporation, I believe the food bank. I'm sure there are others. How are you drawn to that, and how do you pick, and what drives you in that area?
So I was probably in my young 30s. I think it was when our oldest Jonathan was born, so maybe 22 or 23 years ago. And my wife and I both grew up very modestly, and I just realized at a young age, we have more than we need, and so we need to find a way to give back. I was invited to take a tour of a school and organization up in the Albany area shortly after my son was born. It's called Wildwood. It's an organization that supports people with autism. And on the day that I took the tour, I met a bunch of wonderful kids and heard their stories. And then at the end of the tour, and this was the perfect setup, they had two mothers there that started explaining to me what it's like when there's something different about your child. And when you get referred to a specialist, and when the specialist says your son or daughter is probably going to be nonverbal and are not going to be able to function most likely in the public school system. And they did a much better job explaining it very
Hmm.
emotionally than I am now. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you need me to do? Well, would you be willing to come on a foundation board? Sure. I have no idea what that is, but let me get involved. So I found an awful lot of meaning in getting involved in the community and helping organizations that help people that are less fortunate. And so when we moved to the Hudson Valley 13 years ago, I was introduced to Jim DeStefano in Occupations, which is now Access. So I've been
Right.
on their foundation board for the last 13 years. I think I've chaired it for the last 4 or 5. I don't remember. That organization does incredible work. Wanting to be an advocate for the business community and the region as a whole, I got involved with Hudson Valley Economic Development Corporation 5 years ago with Mike Oates, who's wonderful. I've been the board chair there for I think the last 2.5 or 3 years. When I was asked to get involved with the regional food bank, I don't think there's anybody that can understand the perils of food insecurity. So how do you say no to that? And I recently went on Father Marcano's board at San Miguel Academy
Yeah.
because education I think is key to trying to improve the socioeconomic status and abilities one has in life. So um, I've learned over time what my skills are, what my value is, and how to kind of use influence. I don't get involved in things that I'm not passionate about, and so it's been a great opportunity to grow and meet people and do some good work.
Yeah, and I mean the organizations you mentioned, you introduced us to the San Miguel Academy, which is kind of this little hidden gem in the city of Newburgh that is really doing tremendous work. As is Access Sports for Living, is a big gem in the
Yeah,
region
yeah.
that takes on all kinds of challenges, and it is a tremendous resource. And then, of course, the Hudson Valley Economic Development Corporation, can't say enough good things about the work that they do to promote the region. And really, and I think maybe this is something that you have brought to that organization in conjunction with Mike's great leadership, but that building connections, really trying to focus on the bringing people together, particularly post-COVID, but really just to meet. There's so many talented people in the region. Maybe they don't always know each other, and you are actually. I will pay this compliment as well. You're as good a dot connector and as anybody I've ever met.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, sometimes it's pretty obvious we should know, one another. And it's great to see relationships develop and projects happen as a result of those relationships and collaborations occur. There's just so much positive activity in the Hudson Valley right now. I mean, obviously, we have challenges, the state has challenges.
Sure.
But I think if we focus on those challenges as opposed to what the opportunities are, then we can kind of get mired in it and come up with maybe some excuses on why things can't get done.
Right. Yeah, it is also something I've learned through the decades. Is I used to think that stuff just kind of happened on its own, and I really have figured out that it really happens because people want it to happen and make it happen. And I think we do have some folks who are just really good leaders in the region, and include yourself among those. But maybe you can talk a little bit about that role of leader and leadership, and how you perceive yourself in that role and how you see others.
I mean, how I see others, the role models that I had growing up came out of the Capital District. So Neil Golub owns Price Chopper. The Golubs own Price Chopper.
Okay.
I've observed Neil from afar. I've been lucky enough to be on a board with Neil. And he has a very quiet but very direct way of getting things done. He's Neil Golub. Bob Curley was the chairman and CEO of Citizens Bank. I've had the opportunity to observe Bob from afar and then be on boards. And then ultimately, Bob became a mentor to me. And he's got a different style from a personality standpoint, but, very, very good at getting things done. There's a gentleman who was the CEO of Albany International who literally reminded me of Norman Schwarzkopf because he'd sit in board meetings with a cigar in his mouth that he was chomping on. And he would just stare at people, and it was very unnerving. And I said to him, we were on a capital campaign together. His name's Frank, and I walked out and I said, Frank, I don't think I ever want to disappoint you. And he goes, you do not want to disappoint me. So, I mean, none of those are really my personality, but I think leadership is doing, not telling. So if I'm going to get involved with a capital campaign, or if I'm going to get involved with the San Miguel board, or if I'm going to get involved with Access Supports for a Living, I have not asked to be the board chair of anything. I've never asked to be the board chair. I've never vied for it. I think people maybe see me as a leader or maybe approach me to do those things because I get things done. And so you can ask Chris Masters from Access.
Sure.
Our foundation board meetings are an hour or less, and they are focused on what activities are we asking the board to get done. And then in a nice but honest way, following up with the board members, if you said you're going to do something, did you do what you said you're going to do? Now, it's a volunteer organization, so you can't be terribly heavy-handed with it. But if we find someone is chronically not doing what they said they're going to do, well, therefore, there must be a lack of true commitment, and perhaps there's a lack of alignment, and perhaps there's a better place for them, and there's a better person for us. And that's kind of my mindset around that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, and again, someone who has seen you in action, you definitely don't have the cigar, but you're definitely not somebody you want to disappoint. So I appreciate that. I appreciate that from a leadership perspective. So what's next with Affinity? I mean, is it more the same? I mean, are you reaching out to in different geographies? So you mentioned, down from the capital region down here. Where do you see your organization growing and developing?
I think we've grown nicely in the Upper Hudson Valley. I want to spend some time focusing on Westchester. I mean, I live here. I should. We've got some opportunities in the city. I think we have more opportunities to grow up in the Albany market, some great relationships with law firms and accounting firms and banks. And we're not really struggling on the business development side right now. I think it's, starting to maybe contemplate our own succession plan. I mean, I see myself going hard full time for another 10 years, but as you know, 10 years goes fast. Just because I think I have 10 years doesn't mean I have 10 years.
Right. Right.
We've got some young talented people in our organization. I think mentoring them up and coaching them up and growing them up is an important focus of ours right now. But I don't see the business climate in terms of what we do changing all that much. I think, our quote unquote competitors are still kind of in a narrow lane of investments or insurance, and
Right.
that's fine. We're respectful of all of our clients' existing relationships. That's not what we're trying to unseat or undo. So I don't run into a lot of prospective clients say, well, somebody we pay a fee to already has all of this stuff figured out for us and does what you do. It's not saying there
Right.
isn't competition out there. I just don't run into a lot of it.
And this question just popped in my head, so it's maybe a little off subject, but we hear a lot about generational differences these days. Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, baby boomers. You must be like dealing with it every day. Do you extrapolate generalities? Do you see that, or is it really unique to each individual in each situation?
I think it's unique to each individual and situation. I mean, I hear all the time, this generation doesn't want to work as hard, this generation that, and look, my grandparents are probably saying that about my generation.
Sure.
I think a lot of it, Harold, is how were these people raised, right? What expectations were set? We have two sons. Jonathan's 23, William's 18. They are both super hardworking kids. They want to create their own success. They are charitable with their time. They're involved with their respective communities. They're not perfect, but they're good people, and they don't want anything handed to them. My son just passed the first three parts of his CPA exam. His goal was before he starts working full time, which will be October, get that behind him. I can tell you he has a lot of friends in the same set of circumstances that haven't passed one part of the CPA exam because in their mind they have 5 years once
they have more time, right? Yeah.
Right.
Right.
We didn't dictate that to him. We didn't even suggest it to him. That's why would I sit around, or why would I take a part-time job and earn a couple bucks? Let's just get this thing done. Our youngest, who's at the University of Maryland, has an incredible work ethic and drive and wants to create his own success. They're not looking for handouts. And so I find a lot of those situations with the younger generation. And I think it's really a function of, what kind of a household did they grow up in? How were they raised? What was discussed? What values were set? And you didn't ask, but I'll go there with this, back to kind of the evolution of Affinity. One of the things I'd like to see us get really good at, excellent at, is helping families decide what their value system is, and then how to put that into a family constitution. Like, how do you say the Smith family or the, whatever, the Adams family or the Preddice family or the King family, this is what's important to them. And so we sat down maybe a year and a half ago as a family, and we actually had a working session around that. And we created a very simple document that says, we value, right? We cherish, we celebrate. Like, we broke a couple of categories out, and we use that with the kids to talk about our perspective on, on what we hope for them, and communicate with them on what their perspective is for what they hope for them. And it was actually a really cool experience. And I've been sharing that with clients, and I haven't had a single person say anything other than, hey, can you help us with that? So,
that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, I'd like to see us really, learn and build some resource around that.
Yeah, the sooner families do that, probably the better.
Yeah,
for sure.
Exactly.
Well, Nick Preddice, partner at Affinity Group, LLC, thank you very much for being a part of the Council of Industry podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Harold. This was fun.